Orunmila, and I am the president of the African National Women's Organization. And we're out here today in front of the Department of Justice because we recognize that the incident in Texas, McKinney, Texas, where a group of black teenagers were attacked by the police in the community is something that we can't be silent about. And we want to read a statement about our position right here in front of the Department of Justice. The attack, the African National Women's Organization denounces the colonial police attack on African children at a pool party in Dallas, suburb of McKinney, Texas, on Friday, June 5th. A video from the scene shows white McKinney cop Eric Casebolt brutally pulling 15-year-old Yejide Orunmila to the ground, pinning her down, and mounting her on the grass outside the pool in a violent assault with heavy sexual connotations. The crime of Becton and other children at the party was their presence in an upscale, predominantly white neighborhood. Casebolt also pulled his gun and pointed it at an African teen who courageously tried to come to Becton's aid, yelling profanities at the children and chasing them physically. The physically abusive cops was joined by at least 9 other cops and aided by white residents who terrorized the youth, handcuffed many, and forced them to sit or lay on the ground. The group of African children had also been physically attacked by white women who lived in a neighborhood where the pool party was taking place. Screaming racial slurs at the children, the women's actions exposed the complicity of many white people, including white women, in the colonial terror historically waged against African people. This blatant sexual violence against Becton brings up the history of sexual violence by white men against women and girls throughout our forced enslavement and as colonial subjects inside the United States. This attack is tied to the reality that countless African women have been raped, lynched, tortured, terrorized by white men over the centuries, often in front of African children and men, and often with the complicity of white people. The African National Women's Organization also recognizes that this assault on these African children is just the latest in an ongoing stream of colonial violence, murder, and abuse of the African community. The number of African victims of terror and murder by the colonial police continues to grow at a rate of at least 2 a day in the U.S. From 7-year-old Ayanna Jones in Detroit, to 12-year-old Tamir Rice in Cleveland, to 18-year-old Michael Brown in Ferguson, to 43-year-old Eric Garner in Staten Island, to 92-year-old Katherine Johnston in Atlanta. The list goes on and on to such an extent that our children are riddled with fear and loathing at the sight of police. This is why the African National Women's Organization has demanded black community control of the police and against the colonial state in a system that was built on the enslavement of African people and the theft of our labor, resources, freedom, and land stolen from the indigenous people. On April 17th and 18th, the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations held a national conference at St. Louis, Missouri, drawing African participants from all over the U.S., many of whom have been victimized by the police violence. The conference launched a campaign for black community control of the police, a campaign that was enthusiastically embraced by mothers and families of members of victims of police violence in the African community at large. At the conference, the BIBC recognized that the murders and assaults of the African community are not accidents due to the lack of police body cameras or lack of training. The BIBC recognized that this is a problem that can't be fixed by a police review board or divisionary government-sponsored discussions on race relations. Through black community control of the police, the African community will be empowered to hire, fire, and determine the training of police. ANWO joins with the Black is Back Coalition in making the following demands: the immediate arrest of McKinney cop Eric Casebolt for sexual assault on a 15-year-old Yejide Orunmila. The indictment and arrest of all cops involved in the attack on the children at the pool party. Indictment and arrest of the white women who assaulted the African children prior to the police arrival. Reparations to the families of the children threatened and assaulted by police and white citizens in this attack. If you want to reach out to our organization, ANWO can be reached at info@anwouhuru.org. info@anwouhuru.org. Uhuru. At this time, I'll be taking any questions that folks may have about our presence and what our further position is.
So I wanted to ask, why specifically do you want to charge him with sexual assault on that black teenager?
In addition to him obviously being an arm of the state, a police officer that is not there to protect black people, but to protect the white neighborhood and white property, we want to charge him with sexual assault because we know that when African women are arrested or when they are stopped by the police, that there are many cases where black women have been sexually violated, and this is our first time seeing something of this nature on video. And we also know that Eric Casebolt, the cop who mounted this young 15-year-old child, was also previously sued for sexual assault in 2008. So he has a history of violence, he has a history of bias against African people, and he has a history of sexual assault.
Cool. I have another question. So how would have, you talked about black community control of police, how would have black community control of police would have prevented the situation that happened in McKinney, Texas?
If we had black community control of the police, we would have, first of all, the situation would have never occurred, because then the police would have been accountable to the black community that is slated to hire and or fire and determine whether or not they can police our communities. And the level of aggression that was used in this incident, when black children can't even go to a pool party without the community coming in and calling racial epithets and cursing at children and physically assaulting, beating children, and then nothing come of it? Absolutely not. The police need to arrest the adults who actually beat on these young children. They need to be accountable to the community in which it serves. And we recognize that this community in and of itself was a predominantly white community, but we're saying that police, doesn't have to be black, but police that serves our interests in these communities as well, because we understand the threat of the overall white population against our children as well.
And I have another question. Could you talk about some of the other work that your organization does?
Yeah, so African National Women's Organization is a new organization. It's an international organization that's tied to the overall Uhuru movement, which is based in many places around the world, namely Africa, Sierra Leone, South Africa, London, Sweden, the United States and various states, the Caribbean and South America. And we are tied to many of the issues. We want to offer dual and contending power to the current situation that we're faced to serve underneath colonialism, U.S. domestic colonialism, and colonialism that expresses itself in different places around the world. Some of the plans that ANWO has, some of the work that we're doing actually is organizing around organizing African mothers who are the second victim of police violence. When their sons and their children are being murdered by police, we've been organizing African mothers in a subcommittee of our work called the African Mothers Against State Violence, who will be going out and organizing other mothers who have been left to deal with the consequences of police murder of their children, police murder of their husbands, police murder of their family members. And so we're organizing with them to bring black community control of police to communities around the United States. In addition to that, we are organizing Uhuru Kijiji Child Care Collective and a whole bunch of other issues that would address specifically the issues of African women.
Okay. The last question, how can we get in contact with your organization?
You can go to anwouhuru.org to find out more about our organization. You can also go to blackisbackcoalition.org to find out more about the call for black community control of the police. And you can go to reach out to us at info@anwouhuru.org.
Yeah, I commend ANWO for taking up this stand and really taking this issue. I just wanted to know, are you, your plans, are you also organizing African women who are currently living in the United States, who are born in in Africa, the Caribbean, and other parts of the world.
The African National Women's Organization represents all African women, whether you are born or raised in the United States, whether you were born in Africa, whether you were born in Europe, whether you were born in any other place around the world. We represent all African women. And we recognize that the different contradictions have levels of where we are. So for example, in Africa, there may be a higher need for instances where we actually challenge the state to provide infrastructure for our country so that we won't have to endure grueling labor. We are in the United States addressing various issues around mass incarceration, around horizontal violence or domestic violence, around violence directed toward us by the police state. So we're here representing all African women wherever we may be around whatever contradiction that is colonially imposed by the oppressive overseer government.